but it's absolutely necessary for us to see it and feel it and acknowledge it in order for us to give ourselves healing. And in the healing is self-forgiveness, and in the self-forgiveness is freedom. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a great day. Every single day has that opportunity. And today is an especially emotional day for me, sharing with you a very heartfelt story, but also because I know the impact of what this could mean in your life. Today, we are speaking about the all-important and absolute necessity of self-forgiveness. You know, at the core of our traumas lies an essence, an ember of the need for self-forgiveness. It's in that self-forgiveness that we find our freedom. It's so interesting how life works out because sometimes our traumas result from things we never expected. You know, we don't necessarily need to have gone through some outrageous, socially defined trauma, like having experienced in person at Twin Towers 9/11 kind of trauma. Doesn't mean that we were necessarily sexually abused as a child to have experienced trauma. And our traumas actually can happen at any point in our lives. Trauma is defined as an event that impacts us throughout the rest of our lives and can be a deep emotional and nervous system trigger to put you right back into fight or flight. So really, anything can be a trauma. And what's so interesting today is talking about self-forgiveness in trauma. Because it doesn't matter what happened to you, there's an element of self-forgiveness that needs to happen. Today, I'm going to share with you a story of self-forgiveness that I didn't even realize I needed to experience. But what alerted me to it was this feeling of fight or flight that was coming up without even knowing what was causing it. And it's that awareness of our bodies, that delicate, beautiful voice that's speaking to us always, that is our greatest insight into what's actually happening. You know, we walk around forgetting we had a body, like cut off at the head. We have so much power and brilliance and in our intellect and in our mind. And we talk a lot about mindset on this podcast and the importance of mindset and language. And yet it's our bodies always that give us the best information, the most reliable information, when we are available to listen. So this is exactly what happened to me. My body was speaking to me loudly. So let me share with you. A couple of months ago, my kids and I were so excited. My husband was turning 50. And we were trying to think of the best birthday present. I adore my husband. I am so grateful to him for so many things. Getting emotional just thinking about him. The universe brought us together, and I am so enormously grateful. 20 years ago when we got married, I had no idea. We had no idea. We were not fully formed humans yet. And so we're completely different people today than we were 20 years ago. And I think one of the greatest gifts of our relationship has been this permission to grow alongside each other and permission to allow the other one to grow. So just know that my adoration and love for my husband is embedded in that permission. I am so proud of him for the man that he is and that he is growing into. And I'm so grateful for the support he gives me for the same. So I wanted to make his 50th birthday special. I mean, that's a big deal. A whole half a century is nothing to shake a leg at. It's a huge accomplishment. I wanted to celebrate him in a big way. For 15 years, of those 50, Killian has wanted a Welsh Terrier puppy. They're hard to come by, but we had one in the beginning of our marriage, and she was Killian's absolute wingman. She went everywhere with him. She snuggled in bed with him when he came home from vascular flow in his residency, staying up all night, and then she would get into bed with him during the day. She rode in the car. We had a Subaru at the time, a Subaru Forester, and I just can picture her. One of my memories is of her sitting on that little the console between the two front seats. I'm not sure what you call that, but she would sit there probably very unsafely. But I just remember she loved being right there next to him, and he would whisper to her and talk to her the whole time. And we used to always joke, because if you know a Welsh Terrier, they're tiny. They're about 20 inches tall. And Killian is 6'6". He's a monster. So the two of them were a ridiculous couple. But, as I said, just love. There was so much love there and such a connection. And so he really mourned her when she died. And ever since, we've had big dogs. I love big dogs, and we just happen to have big dogs. But Killian's always wanted a Welsh Terrier. So, of course, the best idea for a 50th birthday. And I knew that he would say no if we suggested it, just because that's who Killian is. He doesn't want to indulge himself always. So sometimes it just takes that little bit of a nudge. So I thought, we're going to surprise him. The kids were over the moon with the decision. We were hunting. It took us months. We finally found one. My story actually begins 2 weeks ago, leading up to this day that I was going to get the puppy. And I had to fly to DC to meet the breeder, and it was a whole thing. But I still wanted to keep a secret from Killian. So I had honestly lied to him, which is actually one of the first times in our marriage that I've done this. And I told a fib, told a lie, and I was telling him I was flying somewhere for a speaking engagement, which is not an unusual thing for me. So he was completely understanding that I'd fly somewhere in a day and come back. And I even packed a suit. I really pushed this ruse, guys. Leading up to the day to fly down to pick up the puppy, I was so jacked up. My nervous system was on overload. I was feeling nauseous. I was not hungry. I was distracted. I was scared. I was noticing a shaking in my body. I knew something was up, and I kind of evaluated everything that was going on around me, and I thought, what is it? And I kept landing on this damn dog. And the narrative I was noticing inside my head was a lot of negativity around it. This is going to cause havoc in our family. We have such a good routine right now. I'm going to introduce more chaos. We are so living in such a great space right now. Killian's going to be angry that there's a dog, that I didn't go over this with him. Crazy stories that I was really exaggerating and making much bigger than reality. The truth was much simpler than that. This was an exciting gift. This is something I know Killian's wanted a long time. This is a gift out of love. The surprise was fun. I think I had a lot of narrative around lying to my husband and, sneaking around and creating a story out of that really wasn't real. This was just me surprising him with a wonderful, amazing, over-the-top gift. And I realized there was more at play here. There was something deeper. I'm so grateful to my body always for the information it gives me. I'm so grateful to finally have that awareness about myself. That when I start spinning in creating narratives of chaos, narratives of self-deprecation, telling myself I'm a terrible person, telling myself this is a bad idea, telling myself negative stories about myself, that's one of my key observations, when I start doing that, when I start the negative self-talk, that's my immediate red flag that something deeper is happening here. Because that's what we do, right? We find a homeostasis in certain habit patterns. And whatever that is for you, maybe it's binge eating, maybe it's creating chaos, looking for problems, maybe it's negative self-talk, where that used to be a pattern for ourselves in the past, and we become so habituated to it. It becomes a safety. It becomes a home. You're just like someone who's living in an abusive relationship. Maybe this fear of being without the relationship is more terrifying than staying in the abuse, which feels safe. If you know what I'm talking about, you recognize that example I'm using as an outrageous example. But that's what we do when we feel a little bit out of control. Whenever we feel like there's a little bit of a loss of control, we go back to an old habit pattern. And for me, that one of those habit patterns, and I have a beautiful litany of old habit patterns, which were definitely negatively impacting me, but one of them was negative self-talk. And so when I noticed this negative self-talk, I noticed this quickening of my breath, this feeling in my stomach of nausea, anxiety, and then also another control habit pattern is trying to control everyone's life around me. Ooh, who recognizes that habit pattern? When life feels a little bit out of control, you start to try to micromanage everything around you, to try and dig your nails into deeper control. I noticed that happening too. I realized it was time to sit down with myself and unpack this a little bit. What is it about buying a dog for Killian was triggering me, and I was causing me to be in this place of fight or flight and intense control and negative self-talk. When I sat with myself, I knew exactly what it was. And see, isn't that interesting too? Sometimes we tell ourselves that the secrets or the answers to our questions are so deeply embedded that we won't have access to it. And I'd like to suggest that if you can find and give yourself permission to find time to be quiet with yourself, you can always identify it. Because nobody outside of you knows. No. As a coach, my job is not to know what's happening in the past of my clients. My job is to be a guide to help you pull it out for yourself. And so I knew the answer was within me. And when I sat with myself quietly and gave myself permission to feel that insecurity, that instability, that fear, allow myself to see it, boom, the answer came. And I knew exactly where it was. And this is the story I want to share with you. 15 years ago, I mentioned Killian had a Welsh Terrier. We had a Welsh Terrier, Killian and I. She was Killian's. And I ran over her with a car. And she didn't actually die when I ran over her. And when I did, she broke her leg. And when I went to the to the veterinarian, the veterinarian said she could have the surgery to have the leg repaired, and she would need physical therapy every week for about 6 months. And then I made the decision to put her to sleep, to not choose that healing path for her, but rather to put her to sleep. That decision, unbeknownst to me for 15 years, has haunted me for 15 years. And this act, this choice of choosing to get a puppy for Killian, the same breed, with the intention of giving him that relationship again that he had 15 years ago, was enough to activate that trauma response in me. That's where I needed to heal. See, sometimes we think that recognition of the trauma will be so painful, and it is. But it's absolutely necessary for us to see it and feel it and acknowledge it in order for us to give ourselves healing. And in the healing is self-forgiveness, and in the self-forgiveness is freedom. I needed to give myself permission for forgiveness for making that decision 15 years ago. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know. 15 years ago, Killian forgave me. See, because the reality of 15 years ago is I was swimming in a whirlpool of chaos. I was a single mom. Killian was living in a different state. I had 2 babies in diapers. I was running a practice. I had purchased a practice that was a failing practice that when I purchased was already in shambles. The orthodontic treatment was a wreck, and I was trying to save a lot of the cases. I was a baby at the time. I was just beginning to understand how to run a business and suddenly took on all of these beautiful patients that needed expertise that was way beyond me at the time. I was taking ownership of a practice and responsibility for a whole team of women who relied on me for their income, and I had 2 babies, single parenting in an enormous house that I just purchased, which meant bills and bills and bills. And my husband was in residency at the time, and then soon after had started working in another state. The tools that I didn't have access to at the time would have been available to me. If they had been available to me, would have given me so much peace and calm. But I hadn't yet learned how to access those tools. I hadn't yet learned how to live with discomfort and how to let things be. I hadn't learned how to calm myself, how to listen to my body. So for years, my body was running on fire. It was running with this full tank of gas, burning it all the time. Anxiety, overwhelm, stress constantly present without ever taking a break. My adrenal glands were completely burnt out, and cortisol was washing my body every day. And I look back at that time and I see this sweet, beautiful girl who had found financial success and professional success and essentially success of having 2 babies so quickly, so rapidly, that I hadn't created safety within my nervous system. I hadn't created safety within myself, and I didn't even trust myself in any of those arenas. I didn't feel worthy in any of those arenas. And I was just focusing on getting home. I was just focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. I was focusing on putting my foot down on the gas of my car and getting to where I needed to go. That is how I see those years. Blinders on, focusing on what had to happen next. Literally fight or flight all the time. I look back now, and of course I can forgive her. She was in such a state of overwhelm. She was way in over her head. And she was just trying to stay alive. And the fact that I didn't see our dog in the driveway when I was coming home that day is, of course, no surprise. I was wearing blinders. I had blinders on. I was also driving a huge Nissan SUV. I can't remember the model, but it was an enormous Nissan SUV. And that's what I had to drive because had 2 babies and a double stroller and 2 dogs and Target runs because Killian was in another state. And my 5 foot frame, I've learned there are certain cars I can and can't see over the dashboard, over the bonnet of the car. Since then, I've learned. That was one of my greatest teachers. But I didn't realize how little I could see driving uphill on a driveway with this enormous car. And I just didn't see her. But it's not that I didn't see her because of the car and my height. I didn't see her because of my narrowed focus on just surviving. I had no peripheral vision at all. And if you can identify with this, please hear me. You are not alone, and I have been there. I have been in a place where it just needed me to put one foot in front of the other. And of course, I look back on that sweet, sweet girl. I'm so proud of her. She did so much. And I give her so much love and forgiveness because she did not intend to hit a dog. She couldn't have taken on one more thing. She couldn't have added one more thing to her plate. In fact, I am even proud of her for making the decision to put that dog down because she needed to take her out of her pain, and Tarryn couldn't have been there for her to support her in her healing. So now I can do it. Now I can see her. Now I can hold her. Now I can forgive her. Last week, leading up to this day of going down to buy the puppy, was so unusually painful. And yet when I sat down with myself and gave myself permission to really understand what was going on there, and then to allow myself to forgive her, it was like I turned a light switch. I got on that plane and I rewrote the story as I see it now, as I just told you. I rewrote the story with intense forgiveness and compassion and love for the girl I was 15 years ago. And the relief that fell away from me, I could literally feel it sliding off my body. It was incredible. That forgiveness was liberating in so many ways. It makes me really consider the power of self-forgiveness. You know, number one, it allows us to be seen. When we give ourselves time to reflect on that moment that needs forgiveness, it allows ourselves to recognize what we were going through at the time. And isn't that the core of establishing safety? Being seen, that's what we all want. And to be able to create that safety and that recognition with yourself, oh, what a gift. What a gorgeous gift to be able to give yourself. I see you. I see what you were going through. I see the pain you were in. It also allows that, right? Because I think many times when we're going through traumatic events, we emotionally bypass. We put the pain down. We say, I don't have time for this right now. For sure, that's what I was doing at the time. And giving ourselves permission for self-forgiveness allows us to get a little window into that and say, oh, sweetheart, you were in so much pain. I acknowledge that right now. I acknowledge that things were out of your control. You were just holding it together, but I recognize and I feel your pain. And I give you permission to make that pain real. We know that when we emotionally bypass, in other words, whenever we have feelings and we don't allow ourselves to journey through those feelings, when we push them down, we know that's going to create some kind of problem later on. It's going to come out sideways, whether it comes out sideways at someone or within ourselves, but that emotion needs to be felt. So this act of going back and forgiving ourselves for a previous event allows us to recognize the pain that maybe we were bypassing or ignoring or pushing down at the time. gives us permission to make mistakes. When I went through that story again and I recognized what I was going through at the time, and I rewrote that story and identified a few events happening around the same time, it allows me to see it's okay to make mistakes. That was a huge one. And trust me, that was just one of many happening in that era of my life. But it allows me to look back now and see I'm okay. I made some bad mistakes at that time, and I can forgive myself. But it gives me permission to make mistakes in the future. Now, of course, I'm not going to relive that life. I've learned so many amazing tools since then. I've grown and become a more developed human and a greater insight into my spiritual being. I can access my higher self now. But it also allows me the permission to make mistakes, to take action, even if I don't know the outcome. Like maybe buying a dog, welcoming a puppy into the house. It gave me permission to let that be and then to see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen with this puppy, but I do know that I'm giving myself permission to make mistakes. And then the fourth thing that I think self-forgiveness really does is it allows our higher self to take the wheel. When we give ourselves forgiveness, we're really stepping into a higher version of ourselves, stepping out of this mundane world, this ego-driven world, and we're allowing our higher self to look down and give that compassion, that love that we're seeking. So the question is, how do you do this? Well, one way is to sit down with a journal. That's my favorite way. For me, there's something about writing with my hand, with a pen in my hand. And for me, this works. Maybe for you, it looks differently. But about putting pen to paper and writing out the story again. And that's what I did. I wrote the story of what happened 15 years ago and gave myself permission to see it from a lens of the now Tarryn. This Tarryn who can see what she was going through. I'm the only one that knows. I mean, sure, my family was there and Killian was there, but no one knows what I was experiencing except me. So rewriting the story, giving myself permission to be seen in that moment, giving myself permission to feel those feelings. And of course, when you're doing this, you might notice your nervous system getting jacked up again. So I did a ton of nervous system regulation. And you know what that looks like. A lot of deep breathing. For me, a lot of tapping, emotional freedom tapping and deep breathing are my strongest tools for regulating my nervous system. So as I was writing this down, and trust me, the tears were pouring, I was giving myself permission to calm myself down, to remind myself I am safe. I am just revisiting this story. I'm not reliving it. I'm just revisiting it with new, mature, understanding, compassionate eyes from a lens of someone who sees what I was going through and knows the bigger picture. Today I am safe. She was safe at that time, but she didn't know it. She felt unsafe. And now I can see her and hold her in that understanding. So writing the story was my tool for revisiting. But the key is allowing yourself to see yourself, giving yourself permission to feel those emotions, reminding yourself you are safe and holding space for yourself to allow yourself to process those emotions. And then deep forgiveness, offering enormous compassion and understanding. It's so interesting that, something as seemingly silly as getting a dog for my husband for his 50th birthday was such a pinnacle of change in my life and deeper understanding. Something so silly and ridiculous. But sometimes those moments can give color and meaning to so many others. And what that was for me was a deep level of self-forgiveness that I hadn't yet given myself. And, really listening to my body is exactly what allowed me to see the need for it. I'm so honored to share this story with you. As I was writing the story, it of course was a very personal thing that I was going through. But as I was writing it, I knew that this was an important story to share here with all of you incredible, incredible listeners, because it's not a story that's unique to me. It's one that is shared by all of us. And that when we can share our stories, we can see ourselves in another person's story. And I just knew that this message needed to be heard, and maybe this message needs to be heard by you today. Maybe you were drawn to this podcast episode because you needed this permission of self-forgiveness. So I ask you, what is it that you need to forgive yourself for? And even if it seems small and ridiculous, like really this did seem small and ridiculous and so old news. But what is it that you need to give yourself permission for self-forgiveness, for that compassion, for that love, to be seen and forgiven and understood and appreciated and valued? Take a moment. Recognize what that is. And then gift yourself a glorious hour, 2 hours with a hot cup of tea and a candle and a journal, and rewrite your story and give yourself permission for forgiveness. I honor you always. I honor you always, because this work is the greatest work of our lives. Taking care of ourselves, healing our wounds, evolving and growing and elevating ourselves is the most important work. This is what allows us to be better practitioners for our patients. This is what allows us to be better parents to our children. This is what allows us to be better leaders of our teams and of our communities. And I honor you for having the courage to face and to move through these processes. If you ever need any support from me, please reach out. And I think I've shared this before, but I'm in the process of creating a beautiful course that will be launched the beginning of 2023, specifically tailored to healthcare providers, specifically for my dental practitioners, but for healthcare providers at large can benefit as well. And walking you through how to access tools to heal these wounds, which I believe is so important in our community so that we can be present, can bring our higher selves to our patients when we need to. I honor you and I thank you for being here always. And remember, my friends, when you feel good, that's when you can do good. Bye-bye.